This is the Court Leader's Advantage, a podcast series for court professionals and by court professionals. Brought to you by thecourtleader.net and in cooperation with NACM, the National Association for Court Management. It seems there's a growing disconnect between the courts and the public, which directly affects the public's trust and confidence in the American court system. Judges and court staff routinely speak to the public. They frequently speak to small, targeted groups, such as business leaders, civic organizations, and students in schools. These public outreach campaigns reach dozens, maybe even hundreds of community members. At the same time, media voices reach thousands, even millions. The nightly news and programs such as Dateline, America's Most Wanted, and 48 Hours shape how people see crime in the courts. These stories can often leave the impression that crime is rampant and the courts are too lenient. We court professionals rely on data and statistics to explain the courts. In fact, crime today is lower than in the 1990s. Americans are far less likely to become victims of crime today than 30 years ago. Violent crime specifically has fallen for the past couple of years. The FBI reported a 4.5% drop in 2024, with murder down nearly 15%. The media, however, relies on storytelling, and in that they are experts. A well-told story is powerful and can be hard to counter. Paraphrasing the political consultant and communications strategist Frank Luntz, a single compelling story can level a mountain of data. I'm Pete Kiefer, and welcome to the Court Leader's Advantage podcast series. This month, we look at the struggle to control the narrative that describes the vital role our courts play in our society. We ask the questions, do we need to rethink how we communicate with the public? And how do we reach a broader audience? Here to discuss this fundamental issue are Sean O'Sullivan, Chief of Community Relations for the Administrative Office of the Courts in Dover, Delaware; Darren Toms, Public Information Officer and Community Outreach Coordinator for the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court in Cleveland, Ohio; and Paul Fleming, Public Information Officer for the Florida Office of State Courts Administrator and, more recently, the Florida Supreme Court. Paul is also the current president of the Conference of Court Public Information Officers. Thank you all for joining today's podcast. Paul Fleming, who's telling the court story when we're not? And are we comfortable with what the public is hearing?
Thanks for having us here today. We are really happy to present the story of court communications. As you said, narratives really rule the day, and that's so. I would like to respectfully, Pete, not go along with the premise of your question. There's no doubt that popular culture presents a view of courts that we have to recognize. I think it's unrealistic for us to try to combat popular culture. The best thing we can do is be transparent and open and accountable and tell our process story. There is, by definition, in the courts, two sides. Half of those are going to go away unhappy with the decision, and half are going to go away with some satisfaction of the decision. And so you've got a built-in problem with communications. But I think you're right. There is a narrative to tell, and that is that the courts are the place to come to have open and transparent justice administered and for disputes to be resolved among the people. What we can do about that, most importantly, is to be open with the way we conduct our business. And so I think it's how we do our business rather than how we tell that story. But we do work with justice partners to get our story out, and also within the constraints of working as a court system. So I know that all of us have experience doing this, and there are frustrations from a court perspective, but I think we also have successes in how we are doing and how we can do better in the future.
Sean O'Sullivan?
Following on to what Paul said, I think the bigger problem is if we seed the field. Yes, there are some judges that go out and speak, and yes, there's some other things, but the thing that the courts have to do these days is be present and be engaged, and to make sure we are sharing our story. So we are combating false narratives with the actual narrative. Certainly, Mr. Luntz's point is true, but a story with data that backs it up is better than a story without data. And I think that's where public information officers and people that do outreach for the court can really do a service to combat some of the negative impressions or mistaken impressions that get take root out there, particularly in pop culture or from disgruntled litigants who want to get out there for their own reasons and taint the court image to better their own ends.
Do you think we in the courts are successful at shaping the narrative? Or are the news programs and true crime shows drowning us out? Darren Toms?
It's a tough question when you talk about the court's narrative because it's not necessarily our role to tell a story. It's our role to adjudicate and find justice. And that story tells itself through the trials. And the court where I work is a criminal trial court. And narratives basically come from the information that comes from here. I do think what we deal with is that most courts are smaller courts, yet the most of the flavoring, if you will, comes from above. So most of the media focus right now is on the U.S. Supreme Court and questions that come from there on decisions. Are politics too heavily involved? We on the lower level are not in that same situation, but as I said to my colleagues earlier, it's kind of like the salt from there trickles down and flavors everything else. So we do have to be aware of that and be ready to make changes when somebody asks us about something in the Supreme Court. As for true crime shows, I'm not totally against them because they tell the story with better lighting. Um, it is a true story. So they are going to tell both sides and how it comes out and how a jury reached a decision. And I think those are pretty good. When it comes to news coverage of trials, that's where it gets a little more difficult because the reporters aren't necessarily in there the entire time. They haven't heard all of the evidence, and basically their reporting is on what the jury has finally decided. So sometimes maybe something gets missed in the translation there. But overall, our job is to let people know, as Paul mentioned, that we are transparent and we are doing everything we can to make sure that both sides get an equal chance for justice.
Aaron is exactly right. And I also have the privilege of, I used to be PIO for the Office of State Courts Administrator, as you introduced me, but now I am the Communications Director for the Florida Supreme Court. And I do understand that I'm in a different position than Darren is, for instance, and many of our members at the Conference of Court Public Information Officers are at trial court level. But in some ways, the very much the same rules apply. The best thing we can do is be open and transparent and show exactly what we do, with perhaps worse lighting, as Darren says. But the best thing for us, you talk about true crime, or in the instance of Court TV and others like them who will stream live full trials. I think that's great. Everyone should see how oftentimes the work of trial courts is mundane, and there's a lot of work that does not fit into a dramatic presentation. It does get dramatic, but seeing all of that at work and how hard judges work, how hard that jurors have to pay attention to the lawyers who are presenting cases. That's the best thing we can do, is put our work out there directly.
Sean?
One of your questions there is, are we in the courts doing a good job getting our narrative out? And certainly when you look at it, the 20,000 feet level, there's a problem. We're seeing issues with the public perception of the courts being fair. But I think obviously, as we all know, the courts are a mosaic across the country. And I think there are courts out there that are doing a good job of getting this message out, of balancing the narrative. It's sort of like that thing when they do public opinion surveys of like, what's your opinion of Congress? It's inevitably bad. What's your opinion of your congressperson? And it's good. They like their local guy who's representing them there. And I think those are the court systems that are doing well, who make sure the local folks know what's going on there. And that's like, retail outreach, community relations type stuff that doing the judges speaking to Rotary groups, doing the judges in classrooms, putting out the press releases about programs that benefit the public and show we are doing the job every day of conflict resolution, of bringing people to justice, showing that data about how many cases we clear. There's always going to be an exception and one that catches the public attention, but make sure they know that we are doing, for every one you see like that, there's 100 that I think everybody agrees with how they were handled and what the result was. So, like I said, it depends on where you're looking. And I think if we all get together and share best practices, we can sort of do that across the board.
What ideas do you have on how we could reach a broader audience? Paul?
It's incumbent on us to constantly be reviewing how we're communicating the story of the courts and the work of the courts. And be more than willing to change, but to change when we're not being as effective as we could be. The Florida Supreme Court has led the way in Florida for communications with courts. In 2016, there was a communications plan that was approved by the court that said that social media was okay for courts to use and judges could use under certain restrictions. It said that each court should have a designated public information officer. I think that was a critical step in the development of communications here in Florida. Those social media avenues have been used. They're great, and particularly in times of emergency. We have everything from hurricanes to snow here in Florida that have closed courts throughout the state. It's a big state, 23 million people, a lot of jurisdictions, and a lot of practitioners and litigants that are in multiple jurisdictions. So communicating basic things about the courts, we've got to do the blocking and tackling, and then we need to do innovative things to get the message out. And I know that Sean has been involved with the National Center of State Courts and its report on communications, and I think that has a valuable lesson for us too.
Sean?
That's Paul queued it up there. What he's talking about is Beyond Civics Education. That is a publication that came out, I believe, just a little over a year ago from the National Center for State Courts, because you were asking, how do we do it? What are the things? This is a good place to start. Civics education is great. Certainly we encourage it. We're being very aggressive with it here in Delaware, but it's not the only thing. And that's what this report is talking about, is broadening the horizon of court outreach and public outreach to try and get our message out there. And so if you take a look at that, again, that can give you some ideas and sort of show you some of the best practices that successful courts are using out there to get their message out, and telling the good stories and attacking the areas where people think courts are falling down, but are not. One of the big things is, the Q&A they had was, what if the courts had a body that reviewed the ethics of judges and held them accountable if they violated that? People are like, oh my God, that would be great. Go ahead and do that. Well, we do. Every court across the country has a board that polices attorneys and their ethics, judges and their ethics, judicial canons. And, those are the type of things that when you get that kind of thing out, it moves the needle on people's opinion of the court system.
Darren?
And when you talk about getting out to a broader audience, one phrase I always hate is, well, we've never done that before. And we've never done a lot of things before, and the world has never been this way before. At our CCPIO conference, we discussed social media, and some courts actually use TikTok to get their message out, because they know that's what the young audience is listening to and going to. And I don't disagree with that. Our court does not do that. But I agree with Paul that you do need some kind of social media presence. If anything, we use X or Twitter, and for those same information, Paul, where there's a snowstorm and maybe hearings are delayed, or there's been a water main break and something can't happen. But I really like posting about specialty docket graduations, drug court, veterans treatment court. And I want the public to know that although we do have serious cases, rapes and murders, that's by far the least of what we do. The day-to-day operations, we're trying to help people. The courts are here to help. And when we get the word out that people have been graduating from these programs, have had the charges against them dropped, have been re-entered society as sober and productive citizens, those are the things that we need to get out there.
And that's one of the things in the beyond civics education, another area that when we show ourselves as, problem solvers, as fixing things in the community, resolving disputes, those are the type of things that help improve again, the opinion and public perception of our courts.
We in court administration seem to rely heavily on statistics and performance data to tell the court's story. Is this persuasive to the public? Sean?
It's persuasive if you frame it in a narrative and make sure people understand why they should care about it. If you just throw a report or a bunch of data out there, it's going to fall flat because people aren't either going to be interested or take the time to understand it. So when you put that data out there, you have to explain it. You have to show how many cases you're moving through, how many problems you've resolved, so that when you get that errant one-off, people will understand and see that. So again, going back to Mr. Luntz's quote, if you take that data and put it in a story, it can be a powerful thing. So yes, it can be useful, but it doesn't stand alone on its own. You have to help people, spoon feed them, if you will, as to what the data means and why it's important.
Paul?
Though all of us are now communications professionals for courts, all three of us happen to also be former reporters. And this is a similar challenge that you face as a journalist, as a reporter. You've got to connect stories to people's lives and make it matter to them through their pocketbook, through what it means to their families, to their time. And so if we use that data to connect to people and tell stories that are meaningful in their everyday lives, a pilot program in Miami-Dade to have parking tickets dispensed with remotely. That means something to people in Miami who a trip to the courthouse means a full day because of traffic there. And so you connect these things. Same thing with what Sean was talking about with problem-solving courts. Play up those things that are meaningful about successes for real lives of people. But then I think we also need to play up processes and tell that not in a boring way, but in a meaningful way, and say the judicial branch is unique among government. We do everything we do in the open, in open court. The people of Florida have directed the Florida Supreme Court and told them at the ballot box that a presumption of openness in government and in courts is important. And it's important to us every day. And we need to tell that story that you can see what the courts are doing because we have open court. In the case of appellate courts, like the court that I work for, they write down and explain everything about their reasoning for why they've come to a decision. I know it's not sexy to read an opinion, but all of the members of my court work hard to write accessibly so that regular people can read it and not have to know Latin to understand how they came to their decisions. It's not just court communicators like us, it's all of us in the courts.
Should we develop a course for court administrators on how to marry good storytelling with data? Paul?
Absolutely. Pete, I'm Paul Fleming. I'm from the Public Information Office, and I'm here to help. And I think that is what all of us would say. And I will mention again, the organization that I'm currently president of, and Sean and Darren have been president of, the Conference of Court Public Information Officers has members all across the country, and in fact, across the world, that are actively doing that every day. And we are part of the solution, or we want to be. And all three of us, particularly Sean and Darren in their roles after their presidency, have done great work working with sister organizations like NACM to bring our message to others in our courts and to say communication is important. And we've got keys for you to follow. And we've got printed material. Our members are out there to help and answer questions. And I will anticipate Sean and say, everybody needs a PIO.
Sean?
And just to set up Darren for something, an example of like taking data and telling a story is I know in Darren's court, they had a veterans treatment court. And if you just put out a report and said, here's how many people were helped and here's how many people went through, it will just blow through. It'll probably get thrown in someone's inbox. Darren took that and made a story out of it. He focused on the people and put it on the court's website, so told it himself. And I can turn it over to Darren to give a little more detail on how he made that happen.
Darren?
The truth is, when it comes to covering specialty dockets, TV stations, newspapers, they don't have the staff they used to. So you're really going to have to find something that is interesting to them. And that's what I tell our coordinators. If there's somebody that's graduating with a really good story, that's something we could promote. I remember once years ago, we had a drug court graduation, and a husband and wife were both in the program and graduating, and it happened on Valentine's Day. That got great coverage because now you've got a story to tell, and that's what you got to look for. And don't be afraid to pitch that to reporters that this person went through that, and make sure the person is willing to talk as well. I never want to put somebody on camera or in front of the media that doesn't want to be. They've gone through an awful lot to get through this program, but so many of them are so proud of themselves and know that they can help other people. That's a good way to look at to try to get your message out.
Of course, judges are obligated to follow the statutes and guidelines when handing down sentences. Do you think the public understands that? Is explaining that obligation a convincing argument, Darren?
It's different for us because we are a trial court. So we have the murders, the rapes, and a lot of these are going to go to appeal. So beyond the phrase is the record speaks for itself. Beyond what's on the record, there's very little we can say about cases because you don't want to have something appear in an appeals process that could be damaging to either side. But if you see a story where there's a sentencing and people don't think it's fair, I would recommend to a reporter or somebody along those lines to talk to the local bar association, to talk to a law school instructor, and they can explain the rules without us running into the complications of the potential appeals process. If I see that something in a report is wrong, I will reach out to that reporter and explain that to them to make sure that the coverage is accurate. But that's sometimes the best way to get that information out, is maybe not from the court, but from somebody that people would see as an outside source.
And you can't do better than a third party vouching for you. And that's where your bar associations, your law schools, and you have to make sure to reach out ahead of time to know who over there would be receptive to the media calls. And those law schools, they have public information officers. Your bar associations have communications people, and they are more than happy to work with the courts on things like this and getting the civic education out and understanding how the courts work, and that judges aren't just randomly picking things out of the air, that they're following a strict sort of protocol and guideline when they reach these decisions.
Paul?
It's a tough position to be in because I think if you're explaining, you're losing. And so I think if you do these civics education elements in times when it's not in crisis, and then you have that to rely on, we've got a lot of information on our website about procedures of the Florida Supreme Court, and it's very helpful to have that in place and to be able to point people to it, and also to work on that before you have a contentious decision from this court, to have done the background work, tilling the soil, so that when you say it's important to understand jurisdiction at the Florida Supreme Court, it doesn't seem like it's coming out of left field. That's a tough one when you're talking about to explain jurisdiction, and that the Florida Supreme Court is a court of limited jurisdiction. Boy, the eyes are going to glaze over there. But you can say, if you read the opinion, as Darren said, the opinion of the court speaks for itself. It is distinctly not our role, as Sean intimated. I'm not a member of this court. I don't explain the court's decisions. The court's decisions are what they are. It is important for us to explain procedure and process and the limits on what we can say. It does put a limitation on us.
And
Focus
one
on
great thing
data.
that Paul's court does is they hold mini law school boot camps for reporters, every year or so. I know a lot of other court systems do it. In Delaware, we're a lot smaller. I'm often able to do it on a one-on-one basis so that when we get new reporters coming in, I try and give them the general overall idea of what the process is. So when that moment of crisis arrives, they've already have that information. They understand the jurisdiction things. They understand the limits on judges, or at least in some level. And that's one way to sort of protect against that. So you're not trying to argue something where it seems like you're after the fact trying to justify something when no, that's just how it happens.
What advice do you have to courts that may be struggling with this issue in their community? Sean?
Engage. That is the key thing, and I think that again, back to our friends at the National Center with the Beyond Civics Education, the best defense against these things is often to have things in place long before they're needed. So when you do those community outreach, you make those connections with community groups. You make those educational outreach. So you're in the classrooms. You're making those connections with the reporters ahead of time. You're doing these community events and outreach about the good work the court's doing. The better you're prepared for that when the crisis comes, it will make things so much easier because you've already established yourself as a credible source and a credible resource. You're not only responding in a crisis, you've been there. You've answered the questions ahead of time. And I think that is a key is you got to do the groundwork ahead of time. And that pays back, tenfold when the crisis erupts or when a problem is presenting itself.
Paul?
The time to hurriedly decide that you need a PIO is not when you're under assault. But nonetheless, that's going to happen. But remember that the Conference of Court Public Information Officers exists, and there's people here who can help you and have been in the situation you were in. But we recommend that the longest journey begins with a single step. Look at what you need to do with a communications department and a communications plan now. Of course, you would not be surprised to know that we think that having a dedicated PIO is the best idea. But there's all kinds of solutions out there where you've got people assigned to this. We understand that resources are limited in all levels of courts throughout the country, and that you have to be creative in how you address this. But we have information and help available for all types of PIOs. And so think about it now. You can think about the chronic issues that you face in your community or in your jurisdiction, or you can think about the acute problem you've got right now, and there is help there for you. And please think of us and know that from a baseline standpoint, openness and transparency and customer service are really key.
And you don't have to be a PIO to be a part of our group. We have plenty of people, court administrators, who've joined up, who reach out to us and engage and sort of work on stuff with us. We have a listserv where we can respond immediately to questions. You get the wisdom of PIOs across the country. Just even having a single source of information, somebody that all the questions go to, can solve a myriad of problems. Just because that gives you message discipline, everybody knows who to talk to. So even if you're not a trained PIO, that is one really good first step.
Darren?
And I'll say on this issue as well, if you run into a crisis or an issue in your court, you are not the first court to have this happen. I can almost guarantee that. And along with reaching out to CCPIO, I would recommend that a court administrator, if there's something going on, find another court that's dealt with this situation before. Do a Google search. See if anybody else has had to tackle the same issue. Pick up a phone and call your fellow court administrator, your fellow presiding judge. If somebody's already been through it, they can help guide you through it, even if the circumstances are slightly different. So that's where I would end with. You're not alone. There are always people you can reach out to for help, and don't be afraid to do it.
I want to sincerely thank John, Paul, and Darren for offering their opinions and insights concerning the court's struggle to command our narrative with the public. How we effectively tell our story is a key component to maintaining public trust and confidence now and even more so in the years to come. And to you dedicated court professionals joining us today, your commitment to fairness and professionalism sustains our community's trust and confidence in our courts. Thank you for the important work you do. Join us again on Tuesday, June 16th, for another episode of the Court Leader's Advantage as we take on the issues shaping our courts. I'm Pete Kiefer, and thanks for joining us today. We'll see you again next time. Thanks for joining us today. The Court Leader's Advantage is a regular podcast series on courts and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, on the Court Leader website, on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, LinkedIn, and on Instagram. Did you enjoy this episode? Please share the podcast link on your social media pages. Every share helps spread the word about the vital work court administrators do to strengthen justice in our communities. Become part of the conversation. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, email us. Our address is CLApodcast, that's all one word, at nacomnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to review, but you don't want to search the entire episode to find it? The additional resources section of the webpage has a complete transcript of today's episode with the time markers for when each question was asked. Find the discussion question on the transcript, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can either review the comments on the transcript or listen to the panelist's comment on the audio or video recordings. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leaders website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.